Most buyers making an $800,000 to $3 million decision in the Indianapolis market are asking the wrong question. They're asking, do I renovate a classic home or do I build a new one in one of these resort style communities? And those are all reasonable questions on the surface, but the question underneath of that is the one that really determines long-term wealth outcomes. It's this: are you buying a home or are you buying a social moment? They're not the same thing. And most buyers, even very sophisticated buyers, don't know the difference until they're on the other side of that decision. Let me give you a frame of reference that I think is useful here. In the 1960s, Pete and Alice Dye built Crooked Stick Golf Club in Carmel, where I'm standing right now. They didn't build it for a client, but for themselves. And then over the following decades, it became one of the most prestigious private clubs in the country. It's hosted the 1991 PGA Championship, the 2005 Solheim Cup, multiple BMW championships. And if you wanted to signal that you had arrived in Indianapolis in the 1990s or the early 2000s, being a member at Crooked Stick was the signal, full stop. Crooked Stick is still extremely exclusive, and it still carries an enormous amount of prestige. But the way people talk about membership there today is categorically different from the way people talk about living at Chatham Hills or Holliday Farms. Crooked Stick is quiet prestige. It doesn't generate the same lifestyle energy and social conversation that these newer communities do, and it doesn't need to. Here's the interesting part. Pete Dye also designed the championship golf course at Chatham Hills, his final course before his death in 2020. Same designer, same caliber of golf, completely different era and a completely different social identity. That arc from Crooked Stick here in the 1960s through Holliday Farms and Chatham Hills in the 2010s and 2020s is the story of how luxury, social identity keeps redefining itself in this market. The prestige signal shifts, and what communicates arrival in one area is the baseline in the next. And by 2025, we're looking at communities with indoor and outdoor pools, water slides, splash pads, pool bars, 4-lane bowling alleys, 8 to 11 pickleball courts, tennis facilities, fitness centers with spin studios, golf simulators, resort caliber golf courses, event spaces, basketball, on-site campgrounds for residents. Chatham Hills and Holliday Farms are not communities in the traditional sense. They're lifestyle platforms, and they are genuinely compelling. These places have lifestyle directors, social calendars, staffed amenities year-round, and the programming is real. I want to be clear about something. This lifestyle appeal is very real. It's not manufactured. People move into these communities and they genuinely love the life that they find there. The social fabric, the amenities, and the sense of a shared identity, it's very powerful, and that is not going to go away anytime soon. But here's the question that almost nobody is asking right now. Be the premium amenity in 2035. And what happens to the community whose entire brand identity is built around the 2025 version of it? So that's what this conversation is actually about. This applies whether you're a buyer at 900,000 or 2.5 million, whether you're relocating into the Indianapolis area and trying to calibrate where value actually sits, or whether you're a current homeowner trying to understand how your home competes in this market. I want to walk through 5 decision principles that my clients use when they're looking at this exact same question. And these aren't, hard and fast rules. They're just structured ways of thinking about a complex trade-off. Decision principle 1, understanding what you're actually paying for. So new construction in a resort style community has a price, but embedded in that price is something that doesn't always show up on the appraisal. Call it that novelty premium or the story premium. You're paying for the newness, for the emotional experience of being the first owner. You're paying for the lifestyle narrative that feels fresh and differentiating. So that premium is real. And at the point of purchase, the question is whether it holds or it grows over time. So what I see in practice is that it tends to compress, not immediately, not dramatically, but the new shine fades, and what's left is the underlying real estate. So Chatham Hills is planned for up to 1,500 homes on 800 acres, with entries starting around 585,000. And Holliday Farms is roughly 900 homes on 600 acres. Bradley Ridge is going to be approximately 290 homes starting at 1.3 million. These are large communities at the upper end, say homes above 1.5 or 2 million. You may only be looking at 50 to 80 genuine comparable homes within that same development. So that's a real pool, but it's not very liquid. And when the story stops doing the heavy lifting on pricing, then the underlying real estate has to carry the weight. So renovation, by contrast, is often going to mean that you're buying at a more normalized basis. The classic home in Meridian-Kessler, Washington Township, in the established corridors of Carmel, where the trees are mature and the streets have names that people have known for 40 years. That home has already been discounted for its condition. And the upside is that what you add, not in what someone else's story gives you. So that's the first decision principle. The second decision principle is the HOA financial health and the HOA culture. So those are both material risks that most buyers underweight. And let me talk about those separately. So on the financial side, the resort style amenities are extremely expensive to build, and they're also expensive to maintain. So a golf course is one of the most capital intensive amenity structures in residential real estate. And in the early stages of a new community, the builder is typically controlling the HOA. So the builder's interests, which would be completing the development, selling the remaining lots, are not always aligned with long-term homeowner interests around reserve fund adequacy. So builders often set initial dues low. And then what happens 10 to 15 years in, when the homeowner association has taken over governance, and then the amenities need significant capital reinvestment, then that's going to be a different conversation. So when I look at a home in a new resort community, one of the first documents that clients might want to review is going to be the HOA reserve study. So if they don't have any information on that or hasn't been verified, then that's a flag of something that you're going to want to consider or look into. Now, the culture side is a different matter altogether, but it matters just as much. So many of these communities have active architectural review boards, and we're talking about violation notices for landscaping choices, parking situations, exterior modifications, even holiday decorations. For some buyers, that level of structure is genuinely reassuring and protects the look and feel of the community that they value. For others, it's a source of friction that they never anticipated when they were signing the documents, and becomes a reason for them to not want to be there. So I'll tell you something I'm seeing in real time. There is a real and growing segment of buyers in the Indianapolis market who are specifically seeking out neighborhoods with no HOA at all. So Washington Township is a prime example. You've got large lots, mature trees, established neighborhood character, and no HOA. So I'm currently working with the buyer who lives in one of these resort style communities and is actively searching to move out and move into Washington Township specifically to get away and get out from under the HOA. So that's not an edge case. There's a little bit of a pattern there. So this is a self-knowledge question. It's about what you're comfortable. It's not a judgment call. Some people genuinely thrive under that kind of structure, and others are just going to find it suffocating. So the time you figure out which one you are needs to be before you sign and not after. So the established neighborhoods don't carry either of these risks. There's no amenity depreciation cycle because there are no amenity promises baked into the purchase. And in the neighborhood without an HOA, nobody's sending you a letter about your mailbox or your Sprinter van. So decision principle number 3 is going to be resale liquidity in thin markets. That's a real constraint. At the upper end of any of these resort communities, the buyer pool is already really narrow. And if you're in a large development and 2 or 3 sellers at a similar price point need to exit at the same time, let's say there's a job relocation or an estate situation, you've got the third one's a life change, then you're competing against a very similar inventory for a very small number of buyers. That's creating a pricing pressure that doesn't exist in the established neighborhood where no 2 homes are genuinely comparable. So the resale risk in a new community is not catastrophic, but it's real, and buyers should model it. Don't ignore that fact, okay? In an established neighborhood, your home is one of a kind, and that is a meaningful advantage when you're the seller. Now let's talk about decision principle number 4. The renovation path has its own risk profile, and in Indianapolis specifically, it's acute. Renovation is not a safe harbor. The risks are different from new construction. but they're equally significant if you don't go in with clear eyes. So cost overruns are going to be the obvious one. A renovation that you might scope at $300,000 to $400,000 have a real probability of finishing at 500 or higher at the upper end, where the finishes and systems are more complex. Permit timelines in Hamilton County and Marion County can stretch the job and the architect getting the plans together even at the beginning. So if you're carrying two properties during that period, the cost of capital is very real. But the risk I want to emphasize most is high quality renovation contractors at the luxury level in Indianapolis are going to be in extremely tight supply. So the contractors who can actually execute on a renovation to the standard that's going to appraise and sell at the level that you're targeting are going to be booked out. They're very selective, and choosing the wrong contractor on a project of this scale can have some pretty severe consequences. So if you're going the renovation route, contractor selection is not a secondary decision, it's the primary one. And then decision principle number 5, new construction limits personal expression in ways buyers often don't fully account for. This is a little bit more nuanced, but it matters at the higher end of this market where buyers often have strong design convictions. So most resort style communities in the Indianapolis area are going to have these architectural review boards and deed restrictions that are going to govern your exterior choices, additions, and modifications. Now, the intent is to maintain the community cohesion, and that's legitimate, but it means that the home that you're purchasing inside a design controlled community is not fully yours to shape. The renovation path gives you optionality. You define the aesthetic outcome within the constraints of the existing structure, and you create something that doesn't exist anywhere else in the market. That optionality has value in personal use and in resale differentiation when you do it well. So here's the frame that I want to offer you because I think it clarifies the decision in a way that most conversations about this topic don't. If you're buying into a new resort style community, is structurally similar to buying a stock at its IPO. So the excitement is real and the momentum is real and the story is very compelling. And early buyers can often do really well. They got in at the beginning and the community built out and values lifted. But if you're paying a premium for the story, you're paying for what the development is going to be, not only for what it is today. And like any IPO, the risk is the story that doesn't fully mature, or that it matures on a slower timeline than what you expected, or that a better story arrives before yours has finished playing out. So buying a classic neighborhood, your Meridian-Kessler, like right here, I'm standing in Crooked Stick, the established sections of Carmel and Washington Township, the mature corridors of Zionsville that predate the resort community area, that is going to be structurally similar to buying your blue chip asset. It's not exciting and nobody leads with it at a dinner party. You're not the first owner. The floors have been walked on. There's no water slide, but the value floor is more durable. These neighborhoods have already survived multiple real estate cycles. They've absorbed interest rate shocks, economic contractions, generational demographic shifts, and their identity deepened through those cycles rather than being tested by them for the first time. Now, here's the part I don't hear discussed enough, and I want to be honest about it. So there's a social energy in these resort communities, and that's not a mirage. I'm not making it up. It doesn't fade as quickly as the physical novelty does. The pickle games, the golf outings, the events, the sense that your neighbors are genuinely living a version of the same life that you're living, that's real, and it does persist. What changes over time is not whether the social energy exists, it's the composition of that cohort that carries it on. So the early adopters and movers into that neighborhood who are going to build that neighborhood's community culture are at one stage of their life. As the founding cohort kind of ages, children leave, knees hold up differently, and the next generation arrives with a different lifestyle philosophy. And at that transition period, when the founding cohort has moved on and the new one is still finding its identity, is where the risk actually lives. The physical novelty is going to fade faster than the social draw, but the social draw eventually reflects whoever lives there now, not the people who defined it, when the community was originally built. So classic neighborhoods have already been through this many times over. Meridian-Kessler has been through 6 or 7 distinct buyer cohort cycles, and each one reshaped the neighborhood slightly. None of them broke it. Its identity isn't dependent on any single group of residents' lifestyle values. It has a depth that was built over decades, and it was not designed in a presentation to a planning commission. So that depth isn't romantic. It's a financial characteristic. And in my judgment, it's underpriced in the current Indianapolis market relative to the novelty premium that you're going to see in the new resort communities and what they're commanding. The most useful thing I can offer here is not a recommendation. It's basically a framework for self-evaluation. So stop and ask yourself these questions honestly as you're making your decision. First, what's your actual time horizon? If your honest answer is 5 to 7 years, if there's a reasonable chance you'll relocate, downsize, or restructure your living situation within that window, then the renovation of a classic home might offer more flexibility and a cleaner exit. In a new community, 5 to 7 years is a short runway to recover the novelty premium that you paid and build meaningful equity. And then second, what does resale optionality mean to you? If you need to know that you can exit cleanly on your own timeline, then market resale risk in a new community deserves serious weight. If you're financially structured to hold indefinitely, then that risk is going to be more manageable. Third is, how do you actually feel about HOA oversight? Not philosophically, but practically. Like, are you okay with architectural review boards? Do you appreciate them? Do you like the design restrictions, governance and builder controlled association? These are not hypothetical. These are daily realities. So be honest with yourself about what category you fall into before you decide which neighborhood to go to. Fourth, have you reviewed the HOA documentation? This is a legitimate step that buyers at this level are skipping. So if you can get, an analysis of their reserve fund, or, something that was produced by the builder, or a third party verification, then that's significant to help you in your analysis. So fifth, have you had a conversation with a contractor if you're going to do a renovation before you go under contract? Not a casual conversation, a scoping conversation, one where a qualified renovation contractor has walked the property and given you a realistic range, timeline, and honest read on their current availability. At the upper end in Indianapolis right now, that conversation often reveals a cost structure and timeline that changes the financial picture significantly. So none of these questions have universal answers, but the quality of your answers to them should drive the decision more than the appeal of the amenities or the condition of the kitchen. So here's where I land when I'm talking to clients on this. Neither path is wrong, and both paths can produce excellent outcomes for the right buyer in the right circumstances. So what I'm asking you to do is make the decision with your eyes open to what you're actually buying in each case. If you buy into a new resort community in the Indianapolis area, you're buying a lifestyle platform that is real and compelling today, but you're also buying a novelty premium that will compress, an HOA obligation that will likely escalate over your ownership horizon, and a resale market at the upper end that's thinner than what you might like. You're buying a social moment, and a genuinely good one. But you need to be honest with yourself about that and about what happens when the composition of that community evolves. If you buy a classic home in Meridian-Kessler, in Washington Township, in the established sections of Carmel or Zionsville, and you renovate it thoughtfully, the right contractor and the right scope, you're buying durability, you're buying a value floor that has already been tested, and you're buying optionality, and you're also taking on execution risk that is real, and you don't want to minimize that risk. So the most sophisticated clients that I work with don't choose based on what excites them. They choose based on which risk profile actually fits their situation. That's the conversation I'd invite you to have as you consider your options. If you're working through a decision like this in the Indianapolis market, whether you're relocating, restructuring your real estate, or simply trying to understand where long-term value actually sits in the $800,000 to $3 million range, I'm available for a strategic conversation, not a sales conversation, a real one. Leave a comment below and let me know where you are on process of decision. I read the comments and I respond to them when I can add something useful. So I'm Chris Bashina, luxury real estate advisor, Greater Indianapolis area.